Okay, well, thank you, Stephen, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for being here, also the ones online. And what I really like about the discussion in the afternoon was that I think that the word intercultural competence came up at some point. So it's good because when we COIL, it's not only about just COILing, but we want to ensure that students are becoming interculturally competent, so to say. And another issue regarding that would be assessment, like how to assess that in COIL. And just to give you a preview, it's controversial. So I'm not here to give you answers. I'm just here to give you an account, to do some practical exercises regarding this, and then to, let's say, spark the discussion and draw your own conclusions. That's the idea of today's presentation. And another thing that caught my mind a while ago was that one of my former professors said, if you don't assess, it doesn't exist. And at the beginning, I was like, what? How can that be possible? But then I thought it is kind of possible, because if you don't assess, you have no idea if students are actually acquiring the objectives that you set for them. Okay, so a little bit about me, another picture again of me, hopefully looking the same as now. And I was originally in the English Literature and Linguistics program. That's my major. I also became a teacher, and I spent many years as a high school teacher, in fact. But I decided to follow another path because being a teacher is very difficult, I have to say. And for the past couple of years, I have been implementing the COIL methodology at UDD, which is my university, Universidad del Desarrollo, and all of the things that COIL entails. That means sort of convincing everyone, basically, from the rector, from deans, from directors, up to faculty, and how to design a COIL strategy. And this past year, I have been, let's say, specializing myself into intercultural assessment, intercultural competence assessment, IC, because I find assessment very interesting, because basically it's the proof that your students are actually learning. So it's a huge part of the learning process. So I wanted to ask you first, how would you define competence? Because if in Europe, in case, the term competence is very known, and they design their programs around competences. Do you know, or how would you define competence? Who can tell me? Or should I pick? I don't want to do that. Like a teacher. Like a teacher.
Competence is an individual ability to apply knowledge and competence to a given problem area.
Okay, so apply knowledge. So it's not only knowing, but also applying. Good. Any other?
The capacity of reflecting on why something went good or bad and what you could do different.
Perfect. Okay, then I have a definition, don't worry. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
The flexibility to use that knowledge and experience in different places.
Exactly. Good too. The problem is that how do we actually evaluate that within the course, within the classroom? Right? It's difficult because we think about applying knowledge, practical knowledge, and then you go to the classroom and you have chairs, tables, and what resources do you have to actually measure that ability to apply that knowledge? But don't worry, we'll get into that. I told you it was controversial. How would you define assessment? Second. If you say like test, that's good. It's a type of assessment. But what other ways do you know?
Standardized quantification of competence level.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. What else when it comes to assessment? Maybe what about self-assessment? Have you tried that within your courses? Peer assessment? So basically, assessment is the tool that you use to know if your students are learning. And after you gather that tool, it's not only about, okay, I have this information, a stack of papers, and that's it. No, you have to actually use it. You have to analyze and improve. So it's a huge process. Why do you think this competence assessment is relevant? This is given, like it's pretty easy. Why do you think it's relevant to assess?
I'm not sure I'm gonna have the answer that you want, but for
No,
me,
your answer is perfect. I'm not expecting one
for
answer.
me, it's important that you can see, especially the University of Applied Sciences, whether someone can take theories and practice and actually use it. And competence assessment, that's for me why it's relevant. Can they actually use it in real life afterwards? Can they take everything that they've learned and they've applied in projects and everything and actually use it?
Perfect. It's when they do internships, right? Or when you have practical scenarios to actually assess students and their competence.
I think it's important to use it as a method to inform teaching strategies and methodologies.
Definitely, definitely. And basically because it tells you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong inside a program, even like within the university. You know that the program is working because when you do this assessment, students are able to meet the objectives that you established. Okay, so here I brought a definition, which is basically a basic, not basic, of course, but just one definition of competence. And it is the capacity to enact specific combinations of knowledge, skills, and attitudes in appropriate job context. So it's very tailored to universities because then you will see what your students do in their jobs. When thinking about competence, and this is an example that I like, is like the use of chopsticks for sushi or Japanese, Chinese food. So imagine that the first level of the competence is knowing about chopsticks, like the history, and they show it to you and you say, oh, these are chopsticks. The second level will be, this is the ideal way, in a lab. And you start like using chopsticks to try with sushi and rice. And then suddenly they leave you at a restaurant. That will be the third level of the competence. And the last would be, imagine yourself with chopsticks and a group of Chinese people interacting. So there you have all of it, knowledge, skills, and attitudes too. So as you can see, it's complicated. It's not an easy thing to do. Sorry, okay.
Really, the inclusion of attitudes, I personally think, is problematic. This, to some degree, this goes beyond what a school should regularly teach. I mean, that there may be exceptions, but at least I think one should be aware of it, that teaching attitudes, that's a valuing relationship between the valuer and some object, can fast go beyond what I would feel schools should teach. And including this in a descriptive definition of competence, at least, is problematic. This is not to say that this may not be important, that also the attitudinal side should be part of the curriculum, but one gets into muddy waters here.
It is problematic. In fact, well, when we think about the mission of a university or even a school, our mission is to form citizens that will be, well, good citizens within the society. So it is included, this attitudinal aspect. And then sorry that.
No, I think that attitudes, so the self, how to say, the capacity of understanding that there are attitudes connected with the usage of the knowledge and skills, it's something I think where it became muddy, I agree with him, is when you want to teach which is the right attitude. That is the point. And in particular, if you go with the example of the good citizen, because then you are going, I don't want to offend anyone, but you are going towards society that are, at least from our European perception, not democratic. Then one can discuss about that. And the other thing is, in your example, why the history of chopstick is relevant. One can recognize, use, and using the correct, let's say, socially acceptable way without knowing the history. So there is also, where is the boundary? not
I know.
everything should be in there, not because you are doing a course about chopstick, there should be every possible aspect related, including the fabrication from wood.
No, of course, it was just an example to show you that there are levels of competence. It doesn't mean that you need to know the history of chopsticks. It was just a practical example of what a competence entails, basically.
I just wanted to say from an English point of view, it's for me not problematic with the word attitudes because there's so many different meanings of what attitude can mean. So I don't see a problem with that. It's only a problem if you consider attitude, meaning that, for example, you're trying to create people who are more left-leaning or more right-leaning in politics, for example, then I would have a problem as well, but attitude doesn't have to mean.
Well, the discussion that you're having now is actually a discussion that many scholars have had too with this term. Because as I told you, there is little consensus of the word competence, and we will see also with intercultural competence as well. Well, when we do COIL, basically we sort of intend that students will be interculturally competent. So that means that we touch on the intercultural competence, which is IC. And I brought here 3 definitions taken from authors. Milan, you have Beardov, who is also a very well-known scholar researching this, and even the UNESCO. So it means that all of them have defined competence. And as you read the 3 of them, we are not here to like sort of break down the definition because it's very, very complicated. But as you can see, they all talk about, again, skills, knowledge, and attitude. So the 3 of them talk about these 3 main aspects of a competence. So, well, you can take a picture if you want to of these 3 definitions.
Excuse me, but this is not general definition of competence, but like global competence or.
Yes, because sometimes they can define intercultural competence as also global competence. There are some terms that are similar. That's why I put it there. So let's talk about the challenges of IC assessment. The first one is that, as you can see, I gave you 3 definitions, but there are many more. And there is little consensus of that definition. That means that if you don't have a definition, how do you know what to assess? Problematic again. So my advice, and what we did at our institution, is to set up our own definition too. That accommodates us too. Also, it's too broad. As you read before, imagine the ability to develop targeted knowledge, skills, and attitude that led to visible behavior and communication that are both effective and appropriate in intercultural interaction. How do I assess that? It's like too wide, too many skills involved, too many things involved in that interaction. So again, difficult to assess. Another thing, develops over a lifetime. So as any competence, during your lifetime, you become more and more competent on something. So another issue. And another issue would be that even in this room, each of you will be different interculturally competent within each other. So that means that we do have levels. So if we have a mixed classroom, how do we administer the same test or the same tool for that class if we have different levels? You know, at this point, I feel like hope. There is no hope on this. Like I have given like a topic that it cannot be solved, but don't worry, I came with hope today. Okay, so let's start with the basic. The process of evaluating a competence, any competence, not only IC. The first one, you choose the competence, of course, and revise its definition. And that's why I told you that it's very, very critical that you know the definition of the thing that you want to evaluate. And then you establish learning outcomes for that specific, even you don't have to choose the whole competence. You can choose a bit of it, not the whole definition. You can choose one part of it and then establish learning outcomes for that. Then you need to define and create assessment tools. activities, tools, everything you will need to assess that. And finally, you actually assess and improve. This is a huge topic, and I only have 30 minutes. So please don't feel like with this, you will have all the answers. That's important. So let's do one practical exercise. Imagine that you have a course and you want to include intercultural competence within your course, but you decided to include the cultural knowledge of that. And then among many outcomes that you may have, you have to develop a strategic plan for a company to enter a new market, taking into account the country's cultural context. In fact, I was discussing about a project that we have with this, and I took it from there. What's the scenario? What do you think, which activities you should design within a COIL? Let's imagine this in a COIL context. Which activities do you think would be valuable to reach the learning outcome here? How would you design the COIL?
Well, so if I have students of the target market in my COIL, I mean, first of all, I would try to have students with those target markets in my COIL group. And I would have then explain what is the user expectations regarding the product, like the UX type stuff, what type of experiences do the customers usually want. And I have my students explain how the same stuff looks in my place.
Perfect. Okay, so a little bit of discussion between the two groups as well.
Well, I mean, it's beyond discuss, not just discussing stuff. It's an instructed way that they would try to produce relevant information about their cultural context and produce this in a way that teaches the students of the other context what they have to learn about it in a practical setting.
What other activities you may think to reach this learning outcome that we established?
You let the two groups, one from one country, one from the other, independently go, and then you ask them to compare the outcome, and by difference, you should emerge what are the cultural differences, or some of them that could happen.
Perfect, like compare and contrast. Or just compare?
I think the metacognitive part is generally very relevant if you want to learn something out of, not just see that there is something different.
Perfect.
I think that first you should ask them to do a little bit to define their own culture and to reflect upon their own culture so that then they would be able to notice more differences.
Perfect. You see that while we are doing this, what we're actually doing is what we do with our partners. When you do a COIL and the first meeting, you establish the objective, and then you start thinking about how to reach that objective. And you have the same thing as you're doing now. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? So this is the process that you need to think when COILing as well. Think about the aspect, if you want to include intercultural competence as a learning outcome, of course, because you may not, and it's fine, but I advise you to do it if you want. Assessment. What do you think would be a good way for the things that you told me to show that the students are actually competent? Basically, they did this, they developed a strategic plan for a campaign.
In mine was blended already, the metacognition part, so reasoning about the differences.
Okay, but basically you will monitor that interaction, and that's how you know that students are actually reaching the objective.
No, I will read their take-home message. So they will write down a report in which they assess what are the different that emerge by the comparison. And I will not monitor the interaction, but read that and based on that make that assessment.
Okay, so a self-report, basically, or with the group as well. Okay, a self-report. You see, you have a tool. You have a COIL tool to assess if you want to say it in that way. Another idea? Maybe, well, I don't think that a test would do here, right? It's the test, I don't know. What other idea?
beyond the metacognitive, I mean, the task is clearly set out, right? I mean, to write a report that would help an individualized company really to understand what is the market there. So, I mean, you would have some standards in business administration or marketing, how these reports look like, and what type of detail or what type of concepts would be used in order to describe a different cultural context.
And you
For
would have
marketing
a,
purposes. And I mean, so you would have some kind of a subject standard by which to judge the outcome. And because the outcome is the motivating stuff for such a project, right? I mean, get something real done that helps change the world for the better, or at least for more profit. And so students like it if they get it done.
Mhm.
And
you
you
will
have,
have
you have
maybe
something
a,
on hand, not a test, but a report, like a company internal report. And you say, okay, well done. We can show this to maybe some company here.
perfect, or a rubric to evaluate that report too. Like a rubric?
Excuse me, what?
Rubric?
Rubric?
Rubric.
Rubric.
Rubric? Do you know what that is?
Framework.
Maybe, yeah, rubric.
So what would be putting it into a rubric?
Like a framework.
Framework for evaluation.
Okay, obviously, I mean, if you grade it, you make a frame, but I mean, so by which,
Exactly.
okay.
Oh, it's a rubric, yeah.
For me, it would be useful using that example to have a real company. And for me, I found it to be much more meaningful for students than to have working on case studies. It also works, but if it's a real company and you can choose it in one of the countries of people from the project that are working together, I found that works really well.
Definitely.
And then afterwards they can present to the company, and then the lecturer and somebody from the company can actually decide whether or not it's something that could ever be used. Or they get some sort of input from it.
Definitely. Thank you. Well, this is a cycle that you can help yourself with this when you think about evaluating or assessing. I see. So here I brought like 5 tips. First, you can choose one component of this competence and establish the learning outcomes, the objectives of the collaboration. Then, of course, you align your learning outcomes with the type of assessment you actually make or administer. My advice would be to prioritize formative assessment. That means not graded. I wouldn't grade students on this. I would just do formative assessment.
Well, I'm probably because, I mean, if you make this a mandatory course that's meant to be graded because it counts to your total GPA, you can't simply say, well, we just make it.
No,
In between, you can make it.
You can have other learning objective to assess. So the point is, if this is your only learning objective, then yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
But-
but this is not the only objective. So what you can do is to assess the process as well. So I know that the last grade of the activity is graded, of course, the last activity. But during the process, you can also administer some assessment tools that won't be graded. It's
Oh,
just part to assess the
I
process.
understood you asked that, okay, formative evaluation, obviously, within the process is highly important.
Yes,
Right? In order to not have students run against the wall, but give them feedback, constructive feedback in between on the progress, right? So that's the formative evaluation that
Exactly.
you do in a bigger project alongside the project anyway, right? But if it's a mandatory course, you have to have some summarizing evaluation at the end using grades, if that's what the module calls for.
remember that this is just one outcome of the collaboration, but the collaboration has disciplinary outcomes that you want students to reach. So this is just one part of it. When you do COIL together with another professor, you establish learning outcomes also from your discipline, from your course. And this will be just one of them, not the only one. That's important. You can do quantitative and qualitative assessment. Also, qualitative. Do you know the difference of quantitative and qualitative assessment? Perfect. Okay, you can include both. And also, you can try to embed IC assessment in your own assessment tool. For example, if you have the framework or rubric, you can add a criteria if you want to, so that you don't administer a second one. Okay, so I brought some recommendations when it comes to this, to assess basically in COIL. You can have portfolios if you want to include that assessment tool. You can have self-reflection essays too. As you said, self-reflection is a part. You can have peer assessment too. It means that within the same group or with another peer, they assess themselves. That's another way. I know this is, you would like, maybe you don't trust peer assessment.
I'm completely fine with that.
No,
Because- oh.
she was like, I don't know about this.
I've had experience with peer assessment, but depending on the group and the backgrounds that people have come from, that they will the university backgrounds that they've come from, that they will either be very harsh on everyone else, or they will give everyone the top possible grade and hope that they'll also get the top possible grade. So I'm not always so thrilled with the peer assessment. It can be valuable to get comments and things, but
if you do it formative, it's not graded, you take that pressure of like assigning the grade and you do it just formative as part of the process.
No, because it's a really cultural component. So it's really your approach in judging what you observe from the others. And that is something that has nothing to do with the fact that enter or doesn't enter. I mean, we are not talking about someone that want to fit or game the system, but really culturally speaking, there are persons that tend to be very open and see just the positive aspect, and they will do whatever in whatever settings, and there are others that only see the critical points, like I am. So it's a really a cultural thing.
It is.
So-
But I think that we need to, at some point in our lives, we need to establish a culture of peer assessment, self-assessment, because so far, the type of assessment that we do is teacher, students. That's it. That's the way it works. But at some point, we need to shift let's say the focus of the assessment into the students and also between them. So maybe I know you.
No, I'm critical because critical with this really, because I think it's not how the later in the normal life works. You go to work. You cannot go to your employee and say, no, but I did good because my self-assessment, they say, I don't care.
But you know that there is something called, and I like that we're talking about this because I think that when we see the reality in the class, it's different. Like they propose formative assessment, peer assessment, but then in your class, you say it's not possible. So it's good that we discuss it. But I wanted to tell you that in some workplaces, they do the 360 assessments, in fact, where your team evaluates you, your boss, and also yourself. So there is like this view of assessment, not only my boss and I, but also me and my colleagues, also myself. How do I see myself? So there is a tendency of that. But maybe the Swiss culture is a little bit different. You can help me out with the Swiss culture. Franz and then Steven.
I think one aspect one would have to take into consideration is efficiency. Maybe that's what my colleague meant when you come to the context of an enterprise. The boss, if at all, assesses you, and that's what they have got time for. And all this peer assessment, and however valuable it might be, there's just not room for that.
Well, I beg to differ, because I think, if it's not that formalized between hierarchy when you have your boss and so on, but I do that as with colleagues. I ask my colleague, oh, okay, in this case, I've done that and that. Do you think it was good, or did I overreact, or would I have done differently? So it's kind of, you have to find the right peer. But actually, I mean, in my case, in university, it's happening all the time, meaning that we are asking colleague, do you think, would you have react this way? Or do you think I've been maybe, missing some point here, or haven't have a success I was expecting? And it's, it's more than valuable feedback. And it's not so much critic, it's just constructive. It's just, meaning okay, And sometimes it's very supportive too, because sometimes I don't have only critics, you have as well positive feedback, and it's bring you to a stadium who say, oh, okay, I did good. And it's in a work culture too often not part of the feedback you receive, and it's really helping you to go on with your duty. So
I told you it was controversial. I told
Yeah,
you.
and I think what Annabelle is describing is that real life, short little bursts of the informal feedback that we give each other on a daily basis. So, yeah.
Stephen, and sorry that.
I just want to mention that discussion about peer review, we had a big project within our university.
he's laughing already.
Because I saw the outcome. That's why I'm laughing.
Basically that we all value it, but we all found that we are not prepared to put constructive and relevant feedback. So we need to be trained to be able to give a fair judgment to our peers, to not be biased by whatever things. So it's not that easy, but it's still, I think, valuable, but we were not ready. So
I don't, sorry, just small note of this. I don't think the problem is fair feedback. The problem is when they are critical without any proposal attached, then I cannot do anything out of it. So it's irrelevant for me.
So be
So, I mean, again, I didn't know the feedback for your department, but I saw the one from our, and you tell us, differentiate the way that you take funds. When I have just one financing institution, thank you very much, but.
yeah, but I mean, we should be fair to Valentina and allow her to continue.
I don't know how much time do I have, and I will try to wrap it up fast.
No, you don't remember. Take your time. We will wrap ourselves up.
Well, since I don't have much time, of course, there are more tools that can help you. I gave you these three because I think that you can tailor-make these three into your own reality. Because also the definition of intercultural competence can apply to everyone, but there are some cultural intricacies between cultures. So that means that maybe that type of competence doesn't apply for, let's say, a Chinese culture or Japanese culture. So there are still some differences. But if you want some ready-made material, I would advise first the one in Purdue. You mentioned that you have a lot of resources, so we will put that one here. I didn't include it, but if you want to check that out. Also, you have the WACMU value rubrics. They are ready-made. So if you want to use them in your classroom, in your COIL project, please use them. You can adapt them too if you want to. Elizabeth was talking about the IDI, and also you. I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Chilene.
Okay. These are quantitative approaches too. So that means that at a large scale, they're useful also to pre and post test if you want to do it. But I would suggest that if you want to do like a kind of experiment, you can take this one, which is a little bit smaller, and you can apply that into your own class and then to see if the results got better or not. And also the Inca project, where is a project where you can find a lot of resources too, of assessment on how to do COIL as well. So I would recommend you to check that out after this presentation and if you are interested in COILing. And I have to say that this topic is so difficult that we don't have a strategic assessment plan when we do COILs. We don't have that yet. We are working on it because I don't know in the case of Andrea, Elizabeth, I forgot your name, sorry. Perfect. What do you think? Do you have a strategic plan when it comes to assessment in the institution?
Well, month 3 at Purdue, I confess, but yes, there are goals for, I don't have those numeric values, but yes, students must be assessed, and we do primarily choose IDI as that form of assessment. but I don't have those numeric values.
Don't worry, I was just asking. I was wondering because we're struggling with that, like an institutional approach when it comes to COIL, like to sort of tailor-made some materials for them to assess.
So I'll say, right, for every college, there's always a different measure and metric. So we come from the Office of International Programs, which services the entire university. So we serve every faculty in every school or college or department. So we don't determine what those numeric values will look like. We're just a support mechanism in place to help facilitate the process. But our goal is to, spread the good news.
And I think it's important that the faculty member, the lecturer, the teacher in the individual context has the ability to do that. We can look at it with the IDI, but there's also specific things that Colin within the UX context is looking at for global competencies for his students, knowing how those are going to be needed and applied in their future profession.
Yeah, I think those different levels are really important to look at because you have the high level stuff, like we can sort of see where our program fits within the larger polytechnic landscape. And we know the values are different, but we don't know why necessarily. But at the lower level, we can figure out, through reflection and interviews and other things like that, we can figure out what some of the drivers are. What some of the
That balanced approach.
So talking with Stephen, he told me that you use surveys as a self-assessment tool, that it was beyond. So we do surveys at my university but evaluating the whole COIL experience rather than assessing their own intercultural competence. And I wanted to bring that today to see their voice or their views when participating into a COIL course. But of course, depending on the thing that you ask, you can transform that survey into whatever you want, and you can gather that information. Well, it was from spring 2022. We asked this to 537 students. However, we got a response rate of 30% because we didn't include this as part of the COIL course. So we asked them after. So I would say if you use surveys within the COIL course, it's mandatory to answer them, like give them class time to do it. Otherwise, you won't get the answers.
Before they get their certificate.
Yeah.
Even before they get the certificate.
Before it's over.
What we did, it's a very basic scale. A very basic survey. We have 5 statements using Likert scale. Basically, strongly agree, disagree, strongly agree, disagree, sorry. We have 2 open-ended questions and 2 closed-ended questions. Would you recommend this COIL course? Would you participate in another COIL course? And the results, we had 66% of students thought that the COIL experience facilitated my learning process in the course. So that means a disciplinary view of the course. 94% strongly agree or agree, either those two. Here we are just looking at strongly agree or agree, just positive results. 94 of them thought that including activities with foreign students enriches my academic and social experience. That would be, again, strongly agree or agree. 71% thought that the technological tools used for this COIL course were relevant and useful. 89, working with students from foreign universities is a positive experience overall. And 80%, the collaborative work with foreign peers allow me to exchange cultural experiences and have a global perspective of my discipline. Remember that there were 2 open-ended questions. These were the most common comments, the positive aspects: meet people from other countries, sharing my culture, 2, knowledge about another culture, global perspective of the discipline, and soft skills development. They mentioned teamwork, communication skills too, and room for improvement, communication between professors. They knew that teachers were not communicating much. Technological issues, but it happens. Still, you can have some internet problems. So it will happen even though you do 4 COILs. You have to be prepared. Participation of foreign teacher. That's also relevant because sometimes the foreign teacher plans the activity with the UDD teacher, but then students don't see the other teacher. Never again. And they say, but where is the other teacher? I wanted to meet her or him. So that's another thing that they brought up. Communication between students. The problem is that when you start coiling the students, you tell them, okay, you need to contact this is your team, but there is a chance that they will never meet or they will never communicate with each other. So that means that you need to like sort of encourage them to actually reach their foreign peer. Number of students per group. If you're doing a COIL, I would suggest that 6 students per group is enough and no more than that, because then you have these free riders, which are basically students that don't do anything but still get the credit. So 6, you can sort of manage to see if they are all working. Icebreaker activities, and this is something that they said a lot. And you mentioned, Andrea, icebreakers in general, because it's not easy that you are matched with someone and you say, let's work together. You need to build rapport, you need to gain trust. And if we as professors are in charge of doing that in the case of COIL. So we need to establish icebreaker activities. We need to think about them. Maybe it can be, I don't know, that they record a video of the neighborhood first before meeting them, and they post the videos on Flipgrid, and then others comment on those videos on the neighborhood, or you can do some icebreaker activities that are synchronous because you managed to put them into the same virtual room. Well, the possibilities are endless, and so are the resources in the internet regarding this. And this was very weird, but it happened. The same amount of the same percentage, basically, in both cases was there. 21 and 79, meaning that would you recommend this COIL course? 79% yes, 21 no. Would you participate in another COIL course? 79 yes, and 21 no. So don't be scared of doing a COIL course, and don't be scared because not everyone will be happy. Some students will say, I didn't like it, and it's fine. It's fine, it's the risk. It's the risk. Well, we will interview 2,000 students this semester. So if you want the results on that, I'm happy to share that if our results changed. And what do professors say? Well, every time a professor finishes a COIL, we interview them. So that means 58 interviews so far in my case. And what they said is that, well, I categorize this into 3 categories. The COIL methodology fosters learning. It was really 100% agreement on this. In fact, one teacher told me that she worked with graduate students, well, her undergraduate students, and in Madrid, graduate students. And at the beginning, students were like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't know why. It was a mess, she told me, unfortunately. But in the end, when she asked students at the end of the course, of course, what did you learn about this course? They all said, oh, about lighting in small spaces, because it was an architecture school and they were focusing on lighting. And all students said, yes, the lighting module, whatever. And she said, well, that's the one that you did COIL. So she said that even though students were complaining, in the end, it was the content or the experience that they remembered the most. So in the end, she said that, and they say, oh, yes, it's true. Like, I don't remember what you did, what you taught us at the beginning of the course. I just remember this thing, or at least it was highlighted by the students. So it does foster learning because you sort of change the way you teach for a couple of weeks. Well, of course, the cultural knowledge. In fact, some teachers said, I give more importance to this rather than the content of my course. They have the flexibility, so they say, I want to provide students with a cultural experience rather than teaching about machine learning, for example. I care about that, but it's the view of the teacher. It depends on you. and increases commitment, because sometimes, and it has happened to us, that when students know that they will work with foreign peers, they say, oh, I need to prepare myself. And of course, our teachers also say, like, please, you need to behave like we're working with a foreign institution, like play the part, and they do it. So we have seen that it increases commitment with a course. In the case of assessment plan, of course, they said lack of IC assessment, and they brought up that, how do I do that? I have no idea. It's not my field. I don't even know what intercultural competency is, so how would I evaluate it? But they say, but it's important. We don't know, but it's important. We don't know how. Well, key when implementing COIL, and all of them said, well, qualitative and formative. So maybe self-reflection essays, portfolios, not a test, just qualitative information mostly, and formative, not graded. And the assessment tool, some of them said, okay, rubric, it's fine, I can do that. 360 assessment, or some of them said self-reflection. By the end, they write a reflection paper with some guidelines, and then I get that information and I know if my students are actually valuing the experience. Oh, and here's my contact info, in case you want to know more about the survey or about whatever you may want. In any case, Andrea is also an expert. So, well, thank you. And if you have questions. But I think that you asked a lot of questions throughout the presentation, so I don't know if you have more questions. And I think that this was to spark the discussion, like food for thought. So it's not something that right now you may have questions, like maybe next semester you will have a question. Reach me out. Thank you.